Hi, this is Derek Felska at the State of Hockey News. I'm here today with Matt Hawkenson, better known at least to maybe some people on the Wild.com message boards as DC Hawk. And we're here today to talk about NHL teams in the 2014 and 15 season, talking about which teams are the biggest surprises and which teams are the biggest maybe enigmas or disappointments. So without further ado, I'll let Matt introduce himself.
Yeah, hi Derek. Thanks for having me. It was kind of just a topic that I had thrown out to you a couple weeks back, or maybe a little bit more. But yeah, one of the things that I like best about the NHL is there's always a couple teams that come out of nowhere and are kind of turn into fan favorites in some ways because it's the underdog story. Teams that were probably overlooked in the beginning of the season, at least on paper, and it's definitely fun to see. I mean, I have my list put together, but I always kind of go back to those early Wild teams, especially the run that they had in '03 that came out of nowhere, bunch of no names, or at least guys that weren't given that chance with their early teams. And I guess we can jump right into it with the Calgary Flames are definitely one of those teams that kind of a ragtag roster, that guys that are getting their second and third chances in a way, and then they have the young scoring help, particularly with Johnny Gaudreau, kind of reminiscent of the early years of Marian Gaborik, that could help out with the scoring and kind of bring that finesse to the team that is maybe a little lacking with some of the other players. And then on top of it, they're scoring on the power play and have a solid blue line, and particularly maybe guys that weren't necessarily ever really in the talks for a Norris Trophy, and now all of a sudden you have guys like Mark Giordano and TJ Brody that are, at this stage in the season, they very well could go 1 and 2 in the voting if all things were fair with the voting, which it could easily be argued that it's not necessarily fair all the time. But yeah, your thoughts on the Flames, and if they're going to continue the trend, or if you think that maybe they're going to slip down a little bit.
Well, the kind of interesting caveat to this discussion is they've lost their last 4 games, which they've been sort of surprising and finding different ways to win, with some comebacks and some improbable victories, and people started to take notice of what they had done. And now that they're on a 4-game losing streak, people are kind of wondering if the magic's worn off. I know that amongst the fancy stats crowd, they're looking at some of the statistics about their puck possession, saying, "See, told you so. This was just smoke and mirrors. If Hillard and Kerry Ramo don't play on top, pretty much stand on top of their head each night, they don't have much of a chance." But I think a big part of it is Bob Hartley's got this group working very, very hard, which, as you kind of mentioned before, is reminiscent of that 2003 Wild team, where on paper they don't have a lot of marquee talent, at least to most people's understanding, especially those that are not fans of the Western Conference or don't follow it. Like you mentioned, Mark Giordano is having an absolutely monster season so far. But you also, like you mentioned too, T.J. Brody, which I think is a player that reminds me a lot of like Jared Spurgeon. Tiny, but very heady player. Great puck possessor and gets that transition game going. Can is a very calm, seemingly in the most intense situations. But another guy that's also had kind of a nice year, at least offensively, which has helped their power play, has been Dennis Weidman, who again has found the cannon and found his ability to find the back of the net. And let's face it, a great power play can oftentimes make up for the fact that you may have just an okay offense. And they're getting some contributions. Sean Monahan, who was last year's their top pick from last year, has continued to improve. He continues to show a lot of poise for a young kid. And like you mentioned before, Johnny Gaudreau, a guy who's not very big, kind of like Nathan Gerbe kind of reminded me of when he was at Boston College. The small, diminutive, sub 5'7" scorer, but the guy just has a knack for putting the puck in the back of the net. He had another goal last night. Marcus Granlund, Mikael's brother, fired a shot on goal, and who's there? Johnny Gaudreau to tap it home. And that's the kind of, I don't know, the knack for being in the right place at the right time, and he certainly has that. But I think right now, at least early on, the Flames certainly caught a lot of teams by surprise. And if you weren't ready to work and really, finish them off, they are a team that will take any little hint they can and crawl back into it, for sure. Kind of sounded
Definitely.
like no, for sure.
Yeah, I read that they have 6 come from behind victories this season in the third period, and that's maybe one of those intangibles that you don't necessarily see in the standings, but it can definitely go a long way when, especially come playoff time, where you're trying to scrape together a couple points. And yeah, it's been fun to see, and I think Calgary and the western coast of Canada, especially, it's tough to play there as a visiting team, and they obviously need to have the team put together, in order to compete at home. But yeah, I do think they have the right combination, or at least, if they need to, maybe get a trade deadline rental where, might be able to help with that secondary scoring. And yeah, the only concern with them, I think, well, maybe not the only, but I know their penalty kill hasn't been necessarily all that stellar, but they're at least able to counter that with their power play percentage. So I think they might slip a little bit, but I do see them as a playoff team this year, and the surprising one at that.
Mm-hmm.
We can go to another surprising team, except on the other side of things, also in the Western Conference, but Colorado Avalanche have not been able to capture that lightning that they had last season, and I don't have a lot that I can pinpoint it on necessarily, other than it seems the loss of Paul Stastny has really put them, and maybe even put the locker room in a different place this year. And at the same time, it doesn't look like they're able to turn that around yet. Still have some struggles. Now they have some injuries as well on top of it. To me, I think they could be the biggest surprise this season, just in terms of the complete collapse in comparison to last year. So I get your thoughts on that, and if you think that they're able to do anything to maybe right the ship and sneak into the playoffs
Well, I think not to sound like a parrot from last one, but again, goaltending and the fancy stats crowd uh, now kind of feel like their claims that they were playing beyond their means last year, basically by relying on Semyon Varlamov to have a 921 or 925 save percentage just to win because they were giving up so many shots per night, is now starting to kind of come back to haunt them. Their defense is still very suspect. They didn't really make any moves to really upgrade it in the off season. I mean, Jan Haidt is on their top pairing, and while he's a competent, stay-at-home type of defenseman, he really should not be on your top pairing. He should be, at the very least, on your second pairing or maybe even your third on a really good team. And that's what they've kind of
especially
been relying on. Sorry?
with the offensive firepower that they have as well. He doesn't necessarily seem to be the guy that can spark those odd man rushes with an outlet pass type of thing.
Yep. And he's also not the guy that's going to, if they're working and driving and really causing the defense to crash down low, he's also not the kind of guy that's going to make you pay when he gets a chance to shoot the puck either. I mean, he's not a Shea Weber, he's not a PK Subban where you have that extra offensive threat at the blue line. And I think the Colorado Avalanche to a degree, while we mentioned the misses, them missing Paul Stastny, and while they tried to replace it with aging guys like Jerome Iginla and Daniel Briere, that hasn't quite worked out the way they thought for the secondary scoring. However, I do also believe that there is something to be said for knowing your opponent and not being surprised. I think last year they caught a lot of teams by surprise with their speed. And what teams found out and discovered, and I think in part maybe because of the series with the Wild, was that the worst thing you can do is retreat and give this team space because they will simply be moving faster and they will catch you flat-footed. When you step up and play physical, as they enter that zone and you take that space away, suddenly they don't look so great because now they're throwing the puck away a little bit and the plays aren't connecting as well and their skill is somewhat mitigated. So I think that's a big reason why Colorado has struggled, in part because the way they want to play is being taken away more frequently than it was last year when teams thought they needed to retreat, give them space, and try to not get caught from behind. But in fact, you're playing right into their hands when you give them any kind of time and space.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with Stastny too, you had a bit more of balance in terms of guys that could crash the net if they needed to. And again, to me is similar in that way a bit, but I think Stastny definitely plays with a bit more edge and just, yeah, he also seemed to have the locker room under control in terms of, being that veteran presence, and, he was there when Colorado wasn't doing all that well, and again, for him to just come in and, it could very well be his last season. I could see it maybe his heart's not being there and, just they get off to a bad start and now he's completely checked out. So
I would also say that Stastny, I mean, he's about 30 years old, so he's an older guy, but he's not too old. I mean, for a guy like Iginla, who's kind of in his twilight, and Briere, who are in their twilight, they don't relate maybe in the same way that Stastny might be able to those young players, where he can provide experience and leadership, yet, he's not looking at retirement in the next year or so. Whereas
Right.
Aguila's looking to collect a cup, to get that opportunity. And if it's not going to happen, I'm sure his motivation, like you mentioned before, kind of seriously takes a nosedive because it's kind of like I don't have many seasons left. I'd like trade me to someplace where I can get a cup, please. Because I
Right.
mean that's why you're hanging on. I mean, so and those guys then kind of drag with you a little bit. So I'm sure I would imagine Aguila is probably hoping to be traded.
Yeah. And I don't know where he would fit in, but yeah, I definitely think that he had Colorado on the short list just kind of based off of what they were on paper, and unfortunately for them, that's not translating on the ice. So yeah, I too think that they're pretty much sunk this season, and I don't really see much of a turnaround, and especially in the Western Conference, where if you get off to a slow start, it's so hard to gain those points back, especially when there are teams like Calgary and um, teams that weren't really expecting to have that edge on you, and you look at the standings now, and they clearly do. So, um, I guess another one of those bubble teams that maybe a little bit unexpected as well as the Dallas Stars. They came out kind of swinging in free agency. They got with the signing of Spezza, and who was the other guy? What am I
Sorry,
on? Think.
they got Alex Hemsky.
Oh yeah, right, right. And then you pair that with Tyler Sagan and Jamie Benn on their top line, and I figured that they were going to be in first place by the start of the season without looking back, and it's been quite the opposite. I think some of that, their defense, I guess, was maybe a little suspect headed into things, but they just seem to be another one of those teams that isn't able to put together a string of wins, and all of a sudden you're in 10th, 11th place in the Western Conference, and another situation where it's going to be pretty difficult to gain those points back. So your thoughts, and if they're also a team you think that they can put something together.
Well, I think there's potential that they could put something together because they're not that far back. The thing about the Stars is, in the effort of team building, as Jim Nill tried to do with, he was aggressive in signing a number of different veteran players to kind of reshape the identity of the team, uh, which is really now cored around, of course, Tyler Sagan and Jamie Benn. Um, but one of the things he lost last year that I think is what you want to call kind of a glue guy, a person that holds things together, and while he's very understated, was the loss of Stefan Robidas. Robidas, for the longest time in Dallas, really made their defense a real pain to play against. And one of the more confusing moves that they made after they got rid of Robidas, who was a physical guy, a decent stay-at-homer, a veteran that seemed to be unselfish, and to me, I thought fit into a lot of things that Jim Nill wanted in Dallas, but I think he wanted to get younger, so he let him go. Was the team then getting rid of Brendan Dillon, who was another kind of sandpaper type defenseman who loves to hit. Opponents don't like this guy because he's physical, and they traded him for Jason Demers, who is not really that. He's more of a puck mover kind of person, not as physical. I mean, if they traded for Mark-Edouard Vlasic, that would make more sense. But obviously, he would command a lot more value. But still, I don't know why they decided to get a little more finesse-like on their defense when that seems to be kind of a problem, and you can see it in the goals against. They are giving up over 3 goals a game, and even with Sagan and Ben and Spezza, that's just too much to ask each night. You got to have it at least somewhere in the twos, between especially 2.5, 2.5. Otherwise, it's so hard to win in this league when you're giving up at least 3 goals a game, and that's to me really where sort of the wayward turnoff is kind of taking place for the Stars. And the other thing too that is scary for Stars fans is they are a one goaltender team. Anders Lindback has been a disaster. They really don't have a backup. A lot of people thought they were going to have a backup in Jack Campbell. I have no idea what happened to that guy. I don't see him even on the depth chart in Texas anymore, which is pretty frightening. But the other weird thing is Texas is still a good AHL team, and they actually have some talent in the minors. And I've been kind of surprised they haven't utilized it more to try to shake things up. They actually have a whole bunch of bigger forwards in their system, but they really haven't tapped that yet. But, maybe that goes back to the old Red Wings part of Jim Nill, which is you let your talent season in the minors no matter what's really going on at the NHL level unless you absolutely, absolutely have to have it. Otherwise, you let them stay there and develop. So beyond that, I'm a little bit confused by what the Stars are doing. But maybe they're willing to trade that in and say, well, for bad this year, there's still a lot more years left. Sagan may not even be in his prime yet, so we're willing to live with that.
Yeah, and that is the scary thing. The combination of Sagan and Ben could be there for quite a while, and if they are able to continue to develop those prospects, they could have a pretty dangerous second and third line on top of it. So, yeah, I for whatever reason, I just don't see them as a playoff team myself. But a lot of things can happen with injuries as well, and they definitely are one of those teams that could very well get on a 6, 7, 8 game win streak, and all of a sudden they're that team that we all, or at least I did, expect to be. So I think that's it for the Western Conference that at least I had. I guess maybe we could talk about the Wild a bit, or if you wanted to switch it over to the Eastern Conference for now.
Actually, I have one Western Conference team I do want to talk about.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I guess I'll reverse it, and I'll be the person that's asking you the question. Is one team that has kind of intrigued me with the way that they just have continued to hang around, and I wrote an article about this on Gone Puck Wild, is the Winnipeg Jets. The Jets were a team which the Wild had a nice little lead on in the third period, and then they gave up that lead, and in that game where the Wild could have leapfrogged the Winnipeg Jets, instead Minnesota won in overtime. Marco Scandella got the game winner, but that 1 point allowed the Jets to stay ahead of the Wild, and at the time I said that was going to be a costly point. And now, if memory serves me correctly, I believe the Jets are at least 5 points ahead of the Wild in the standings with 3 games in hand, or the Wild having 3 games in hand. But still, the Jets continue to find ways to win. It seems like whenever the Wild manage to get a win, the Jets seem to do so. Will the Minnesota Wild catch up with the Jets, or is this the year that finally Winnipeg gets to see the playoffs?
In some ways, I do kind of want them to get into that 7th or 8th spot. I just like to see Canadian teams do well. I think that the fan bases typically are a lot more diehard than the American teams, and I think that the NHL teams just mean a lot more to those communities in general. In some ways, I think with the Jets, a lot depends on quality goaltending and consistent goaltending. And Pavlik was pretty bipolar for much of last season. There was games that he looked like he could lead the team, deep into the playoffs with, some of the saves that he was making and keeping the team in the game. But then there was other times where it just looked like he was completely lost out there. I think that Wheeler and Kane are starting to come into their own as well. That they're starting to take on that role of just kind of the identity of the team, and I think the team is now starting to respond to that a bit more, and they're just able to kind of bring everything together. I see them. Yeah, I think I see them as the 8, and I think that the Wild, if they're lucky, are either going to be that 7 or 8, kind of fighting it out towards the end with them. But like I said before, a lot has to do with injuries on either side, and the way the Wild have been playing, and just kind of continuing with the just no consistency. I think, yeah, they're going to be two of the teams that'll more than likely be fighting it out at the end. So, you as well, you think they'll be able to continue?
It's intriguing because the Winnipeg Jets are a team that there's been a lot of roller coasters of emotion that remind me a lot of last year's Minnesota Wild squad. Early in the season, there were lots of rumblings coming out of Winnipeg that there was some pretty serious tension between Winnipeg Jets head coach Paul Maurice and Blake Wheeler especially, where there were comments made to the media more or less publicly saying that it'd be nice if we had some accountability around here, and Paul Maurice basically saying, shut up and just do your job, and not stop worrying about what other people should be doing. And usually that's, followed up a week or a few days later by a coach getting the axe, which we won't talk about Paul McLean just yet. Maybe you will, but we'll find out. But anyways, the Jets are a bit enigmatic. In the offseason, they did absolutely nothing. If anything, they lost a player. They lost Ole Jokinen, and then didn't do anything. And for a fan base that obviously is starving for any kind of playoff hope, you almost had to wonder at the time if they had already thrown in the towel before the season started. And now, here they are, middle of December, and they're still ahead. They're in the playoff picture right now, and they continue to find ways to get victories. And the games in hand thing for the Minnesota Wild, at least considering, I guess, our perspective of the Wild chasing them as opposed to other teams. Games in hand are nice, but those are not guaranteed points. And too often it's kind of like your glass half full, glass half empty. If you're glass half full, you believe that those are guaranteed points and will catch up. If you're glass half empty, you're like, so what? That means 3 more losses for us and no one will care. But I mean, they're a team that, again, I think has kind of done it because maybe they feel like no one believed us or believed in us at the beginning of the season, and kind of maybe with Flames too, everyone was counting us out. So it's kind of your rallying cry to circle the wagons and and try to prove everybody wrong to say like, hey, we're still here. We can still win hockey games. We know we're a good team, even if you don't know that. We'll make you know that.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of those intangibles that you don't you don't see. You don't even really get to witness it in terms of what's said in the locker room and what's said during practices or that type of scenario. And yeah, I had completely forgot that they made no moves in free agency, and um, I probably still kind of chalk them up as, even though they aren't a franchise team, I still kind of put them in that same kind of area just because they're relatively young. They haven't gotten too much exposure in terms of without any playoff experience, that type of thing. So yeah, I think they're well. Hopefully, another thing too will be to kind of create that rivalry with the Wild. So it does seem to be a bit lacking with the Wild, especially since they shuffled the conferences or the divisions up again. But you can say the Blackhawks, but they kind of already have their own rivalries established. You could say Colorado, but they're not even in the hunt right now, so that kind of loses its luster. And then the Jets are the closest team then in terms of proximity. And yeah, I think it would be fun to get something like that going.
But I would say this. I mean, without question, the one thing you can say about the Jets is their fans travel very well.
Hmm.
Chicago fans travel, but I don't think they have the level of annoyance to to themselves. I mean, you have uh, you have the Jets fans when they're in your home arena and they're trying to start a "Go Jets, Go" chant, and that of course always angers the home crowd, who then counters with their own chant of their own to try to drown them out. And so I think that is really where your rivalry comes from, at least for the fans part of it, is that they're a fan base that will get under the skin of the Wild fans whether they want it to or not. And all it will take now is any kind of bitter, as the games intensify, when I think we'll see more and more of that, where that becomes the team that you hate when it comes to town. It's the game you circle, just like for the North Stars with the Blackhawks. You That's the team where you say the Winnipeg Jets, and people just give you a bunch of cold stares. And I think that's a necessary rival for actually both squads, really. The Jets fans can travel to other places, but not nearly in the numbers that they can to St. Paul, and that's why it's got the best potential. Colorado's a lukewarm rivalry, really, because fans don't travel that much. You'll see a few Wild fans because no one goes to Colorado Avalanche games anymore. But beyond that, it's nothing in comparison to what the Jets and the Wild can become. That's for sure.
Yeah, and another positive out of it too would be hopefully XL Arena could get a new chant going instead of the flimsy "Let's Go Wild" that
Wild.
is said half-heartedly. But yeah, but yeah, if you want to move over to the East, there's some teams that I have, and some that I've been able to get to see more than others, and I guess we could go with past Western Conference team, the Detroit Red Wings. They seem to have shaken the injuries off, and something that they've had issues with the past 2 seasons, maybe even longer than that. But they finally seem to have most, if not all, their pieces together. They have Jimmy Howard back, who's been the stability in net that they've been kind of looking for this long stretch of time, and most importantly, they have their veterans back, with Sederberg and Datsuk, and they're proving that when healthy, they can be some of the best talent in the league. And then you couple that with some guys that were able to get some top line minutes last season because of the injuries, and now all of a sudden you have this secondary scoring threat of Nyquist and Tatar, and even Avocator is, well, he's injured now, but he was able to kind of put those bigger minutes in and kind of be the surprise help that was maybe kind of always expected of him, but now he really does seem to be coming into his own, and kind of, in some ways, I like what Detroit does with their prospects and kind of gets them to be the players that they're looking for through development. But your thoughts on the Red Wings, and if you think this is something that's going to trend, or if you think that something will happen inevitably?
Well, I think the Red Wings are still a team in transition. Uh, their last year when they lost Datsuk and Zetterberg for such a long time, that really forced their youngsters to step up into major roles, and I think that's where they really kind of embrace the fact that they have some quality young talent in their system, and we saw the emergence of Tatar and Gustav Nyquist, who still continues to be kind of a revelation for that team. And if you look in their scoring, I mean, between Datsuk, Zetterberg, Tatar, and Nyquist, you have four guys, I believe, with double digits in scoring, and they're a club that I think in some ways they're trying to give some of that responsibility to the young kids, because Zetterberg and Datsuk are starting to get up there in age, and they kind of need to do that. One, to allow them to have enough stamina and energy, especially if they are going to do anything in the playoffs, but also from a confidence standpoint for those younger guys, they seem to be able to bring that fast-moving puck possession style that I think that a lot of people thought would catch some of the Eastern Conference clubs by surprise when they made that switch. And last year it didn't really happen the way I think a lot of people thought. I thought Detroit was going to go in and just dominate the Eastern Conference. I thought teams would struggle with their patience with the puck and things like that, and instead it seemed to be Detroit that seemed to have the difficult adjustment, even though they had played kind of the rough hockey within the Central Division for years. So I think there's still some pieces that need to be rounded out. The thing about Detroit now that's different than it was even 5 years ago is that Detroit is not the destination that it used to be for free agents. And so now that really puts a lot of the emphasis on the draft and their development of those younger players, because they're not seemingly able to snag the high-profile free agents. I mean, this was a market that thought it had Ryan Suter in the bank. I mean, it thought it had Suter dead to right, and it lost it to Minnesota, which to them was kind of like, how could that happen? I mean, it's ridiculous in their opinion. But it was a sign that even amongst high-profile players, that Detroit was not a place you necessarily wanted to go, and that was what used to be such a fuel for them, was that they could get almost any free agent to want to jump and become a part of the cult that was the Detroit Red Wings. Between Mike Babcock and the dressing room, where everyone seemed to get along all the time, and that's kind of faded away a little bit. But fortunately for them, they draft well and they develop their prospects well, and that's why they're still very much in the mix. Jimmy Howard, as long as he can play well, I think I think this team, you know, has the potential to do well and even be decent in the playoffs because one thing we know about Datsuk and Zetterberg is they raise their game at least another level in the postseason, and there's very few people that are as clutch as they are in big games. And no one wants to see Detroit if you're an Eastern Conference foe in the playoffs because um, they have the potential to win anywhere. Although the funny thing is now, at least regular season wise, is this team seems to be having difficulties winning at home, which Joe Louis also always used to be a very, very tough place to play. But now um, maybe they've lapsed into maybe trying to be like the Wild are lately, a little too fancy with the puck at home, and they kind of get away from their game. So I don't know what you think about that as a person who is a bit of a Red Wings fan in the closet.
It's just the nostalgia speaking when I give my praises to the Red Wings. But yeah, I think if anything, I'm more of a Datsuk fan. I think he's just a really fun player to watch on both ends of the ice, and just still has one of the best wrist shots in the game, and just can pick a corner like no one else in the league. But yeah, I think they're still lacking a bit on D. I know in the off season they were looking for a right-handed shot for the power play. I think that's still missing, if I remember correctly. But I do think that could potentially be a rental pickup at the deadline. And then to kind of just go off of what you said before, I think that a lot depends on their injuries, and a lot depends on what they can kind of steer the ship when they're at home. But yeah, I do think that they are a playoff team, especially now with the Eastern Conference. Eastern Conference seems to have, just maybe a few high-end teams, but then the rest are still kind of undefined in a lot of ways. And I think with the leadership that the Red Wings have, and even if they were to maybe lose Datsuk and Zetterberg again, I think now they have players that could kind of step up for those games if need be, and it wouldn't be too much of an issue. So yeah, I think that'll be a trend, and Jimmy Howard has been able to come back from injury and prove to be the guy that they had always looked for. So yeah, it should be interesting to see what they do, but I think they're just playing to their potential, and like you said, have that possibility to even raise that further. So one team that is kind of slowly slipping down is the New York Islanders, even though that they were able to get off to that hot start. They've lost some games in the last week or so that probably shouldn't have lost. They had the Blues at home that I think they gave up a 4-goal lead, or maybe a 3-goal lead twice. And then a couple games ago, kind of repeated that same thing. And I don't know if you think that's maybe just kind of growing pains and maybe something that they can learn from for the rest of the season, or if you think that they're maybe starting to come back towards what their true capability is.
I think some of it has to do. Maybe they've rested on those laurels a little bit. You sometimes like even Mike Yo's referenced it with the Wild, where you start reading the newspapers, or I don't know if anyone reads blogs. Who would read blogs anyways? But they have they read all these good kudos about themselves, and suddenly you stop doing some of those things that made you successful, the little things. And really in that game, I watched both the Blues game where they had their collapse, after getting to a 3-0 lead on the Blues, and then of course their collapse against the Minnesota Wild the very next game, and both had kind of similar feelings where the team sort of took its foot off the gas, coasted a little bit, and then Jack Capuano didn't really seem to do anything in either case to like stop it, talk with his team, shake him up, or shake up the team either with a goaltender switch or whatnot. I mean, in the Wild's case, I mean, we played against Chad Johnson instead of Yaroslav Halak. That certainly could have been a move he could have tried to make to shake his team up and wake them up before Minnesota obviously pulled off its big comeback. Kind of a similar situation against the Blues, where the wheels started to fall off, and he seemed to kind of just watch it happen like a person watching a car crash. And I think the elements are all still there to be successful. It's all a matter of if they can sort of find their identity again, which is, like you saw in the first half of the Wild game and even in the first half of the Blues game, where they play up-tempo, they play very physical, they make you pay for every inch of ice, and then they pin you down low and work it out front, and they can pick corners from time to time. They can get the ugly goal like you saw with John Tavares' goal where he just kind of collapsed in, or the goal where Thomas Hickey swung it in on an open net. I mean, that they create turnovers in the offensive zone, and that's where they pounce. And they kind of went away from that and decided just to defend their lead, and that's not their game. So I think it's within them to turn it around, but whether it's a conversation between the players or something like that, I think it's there, but it's got to come from them. And I still think that they have a good shot. The Metropolitan Division has got a lot of weaker bottom feeders, and I think that they'll still rise, at least be in the playoff picture somewhere.
Yeah. Do you think Capuano's reaction in those games was to maybe send that message to the players that they need to figure it out on their own?
Kind of like Yo does sometimes. He wanted to see how they respond.
Right.
I think you let that happen once maybe, but the second time, I think you stop and say something. And
Right.
even Mike Yo had his part where he called a timeout just to chew the team out at the end of the first period. I can read lips pretty well. It was mostly 4-letter words, the conversation. Asking him, to pardon my French, are we just going to fucking stop is exactly what he said. And the camera panned away. I really believe that was probably needed in that second game too, as the wheels started to fall off. But whether Campiano wanted to have them decide on their own as a team, that's fine. But I'll say this: if he continues to go silent too much longer, then questions start being asked about who's steering the ship and if the person at the wheel is paying attention enough. So, and Capuano, let's face it, if the Islanders do really well, I would think he's also a person that would probably be in the mix for Coach of the Year just because of where the Islanders have been for so long. Another team that was not expected to do a lot of damage this summer or this year, but has, like you said, has played above their means seemingly.
Yeah. No, I have him on my list as well. And Paul Maurice as well was one of my earlier picks, just by going off of the first quarter or third or so of the season. But yeah, with the Islanders, I think it goes back to just the secondary scoring help, and we've focused that secondary scoring idea on a lot of teams that we've talked about. But yeah, with the emergence of Brock Nelson, Ryan Strome has been able to chip in some goals here and there, and kind of turned into one of those players that is basically in your face and tough to play against, and just really is playing without a lot of care right now. And I think that goes a long way a lot of times when it like you said, maybe a team that people weren't expecting to do much, so you kind of play with that edge to maybe prove a point and bring yourself and your team to the next level. So yeah, I think with them being in the Metropolitan Division, I think they're going to continue. They definitely need to shore up on the penalty kill, and maybe that's something that they could potentially focus on for like a rental player, and it could be like a 4th or 5th round pick just to get a penalty kill, or maybe get a gritty defenseman that is kind of a penalty kill specialist. But one team in the Metropolitan that is kind of playing without an identity is the Washington Capitals, and close to the action as you said in the beginning. But yeah, I moved out here about 4 years ago. So with the Capitals being the only team able to watch on TV, I've not necessarily adopted them as my second team, but they're still a team that I've followed, and I post on their message boards occasionally as well. And with Barry Trotz coming in this season, it kind of maybe marked a new era. They had gone with a couple coaches that were rookie coaches that didn't really seem to do a whole lot other than create more confusion with the franchise in general. And then with Trotz coming in, they've kind of started with creating a new identity, but I think it might be a bit of a mismatch where you have players that are buying into it, but then you have players that, I'm not saying that they aren't trying, but maybe aren't picking up on the nuances of what Trotz is looking for them as players. So, and then you have a couple, well, actually, you have 3 young guys. I think they're all under the age of 23, with Tom Wilson, Evgeny Kuznetsov, and Andrei Burakovsky, that were supposed to be that secondary help that we've discussed, and how valuable that is for a playoff caliber team. And those guys really haven't been able to find their groove within the lines. And then on top of it, you got some defensive lapses that I'm sure drives Barry Trotz nuts. So you now have, other than, well, see, I don't even think their first line is defined, other than Backstrom and Ovechkin. They've tried Wilson up there the past maybe 9 or 10 games now, and he's shown glimpses, but hasn't really caught on to maybe the level that he should. But at the same time, that might be a mismatch as well. So yeah, I'll toss that over to you, and I can give my final take on it as well. But you think that the Capitals have it in them to turn it around, or you think this is going to be a trend for them?
I do not think that the Capitals have enough to turn it around. And I say this as the outsider, the person watching from afar, as opposed to being a person who kind of sees it every day. Um, the acquisition, or at least the addition of Barry Trotz as head coach, is really strange in a number of reasons. I understand why they did it, because they wanted to become a more structured and defense-oriented team, feeling that their defensive lapses were too common when they had Adam Oates behind the bench and his predecessors. But the interesting part about that is, unlike in most cases when you allow the head coach to more or less select the rest of his staff, the only person they allowed him to bring along was the goaltending coach, uh, Mitch Korn. No, Barry Korn. Can't remember. Is Mitch Korn?
It's Mitch, yeah.
Yeah, Mitch Korn. They only allowed Mitch Korn and to be brought along with him. Otherwise, the team selected his assistant coaches, which I don't know. As a head coach, you want people that you've picked because, one, they match your philosophy. You're picking people that probably completely buy what you're selling all the time, as opposed to an alternate viewpoint where they may not be working as fluidly as they would under a person that maybe you hand selected. So that was kind of a strange move on the Capitals' part. But from a team perspective, this team is not fit to was not made for Barry Trotz. Barry Trotz's teams with the Nashville Predators was primarily guys that you would say fit from the second line to the fourth line, and there was virtually no top line talent. They had a top line, but it was really a second line or third line on other squads, and that's his struggle to deal with, having some top line caliber talent and figuring out how to use that effectively. But also from his own personal kind of background too, is he appreciates the gritty, unselfish player, and his teams have always typically employed a scoring by committee style, and that really isn't in place within the Washington Capitals. There's a few guys in that team that I feel kind of symbolize that. One of them is former Predator Joel Ward, who I'm sure he's really happy was there when he got there, and a few others like Jason Chimera, maybe a little bit of Jay Beagle, but most of those guys are not any kind of big-time scorers, although Joel Ward can have a good game every now and then. But like the top line of having, you mentioned before, with Alexander Ovechkin and Nicholas Backstrom, along with Tom Wilson, it's kind of like they're trying to be, I don't know, the Bruins in some ways, where you have two really skilled players, and then you kind of put them with a guy who's mostly toughness, who does have some elements of skill, although those haven't been as developed, at least at the NHL level, as it seems to his willingness to drop the gloves. So you're asking yourself, what do you want to accomplish by putting a guy like Wilson on a line with two very skilled players? And this season, it seems like the Capitals have tried to do it with their youngsters, whereas the season before they tried to do it with free agents, with Mike Ribeiro and, of course, the disaster that was Martin Erat. So, it's a team that seems to be kind of like, I don't know, they're obviously not satisfied with where things are going, So the whole move kind of feels like a knee-jerk reaction. And what you often get is mostly inaction because basically you're just waiting for that to be flipped rather soon anyways, whether it be a new coach, whether it be a new system or, trades being made. And they've kind of changed that culture a little bit because Trotz's teams are always built from the blue line out and or from the crease on out. This team is built mainly from the top on down, from the forwards back to the crease, and that's a different kind of philosophy. And you have a coach that's thinking from the back end to the front, and the team that really has always been about what the forwards do. And no one seems to really have an idea of what this identity is supposed to look like when it's all said and done. And that's why more often than not they've disappointed, and it seems like they've just been struggling. And I don't see it continuing. I don't see that ending anytime soon.
Yeah. Uh, they kind of go in and out of what Trotz wants out of them, I think. There's times where they'll, be the dump and chase, running the cycle, down low type of team, but then other times it'll be the I'm gonna drive it up the wing and see if I can get an odd man rush type of thing. So it seems to me that there is maybe a bit of discord in the locker room, and it just seems to me that players aren't necessarily buying into things, and they don't necessarily even seem to be all that happy there. You got Jason Chimera playing on the fourth line, which I'm not saying he should be on the first line, but I think that he's had a bit of trouble, maybe not adapting, but I don't think he seems to be too happy to be there. He took a really dumb penalty in overtime Thursday night, and that penalty ended up costing them the game. And his play in general this season has kind of been lackluster. But I don't know. I think maybe he could be a guy that could use a change of scenery, but he obviously isn't the answer or main problem with what's going on with the Caps. And I don't. As weak as the Metropolitan Division is, I just don't see him as a playoff team this year. And I've even tossed the idea out on the Caps message board as to whether or not Ovechkin is on the table in terms of a trade. Because I think in a lot of ways it's either going to be choosing Barry Trotz or choosing Alex Ovechkin. And I think they very well could be in the same locker room, but to me it's just not necessarily the most ideal matchup in terms of coach and player. So, and then on top of it, their penalty kill and goaltending has been pretty inconsistent as well, and that just doesn't bode well for a team that's looking to get into the playoffs. The Caps played the Columbus Blue Jackets Thursday night, so I figured that could be a segue in. Columbus I think is trending more towards the team that we thought they would be, but at the same time, I don't know if it's maybe getting to be too late for them to creep up the standings and maybe snag that eighth spot like they did last season. I think they were the 8th spot last season at least. But they're starting to get some of their players back from injury. Ryan Johansson seems to be back into game shape after missing the entire training camp, and I think that maybe they're starting to put together something that I would hopefully at least be able to compete in the Eastern Conference. And with Bobrovsky back, should be hopefully healthy for the rest of the season. I could see them being a team that has a chance to sneak in, but I'll let you touch up on that a little bit.
I don't think they have a chance. I think the injuries have dug them a pretty precipitous hole. I mean, this was a team that I think had an absolute ton of momentum going into this season until the holdout by Ryan Johansson, which really kind of went against a lot of things that John Davidson and Jarmo Kekalainen had been building. They were really kind of rebuilding the Blues in Columbus. The best way to say it, they were creating that identity by drafting players that, and I think, really fit a lot of the ways that we think of the Blues. Some smaller, skilled guys, some tougher grit along the blue line that can also move the puck and shoot, and then a whole cast of somewhat bigger-bodied forwards that have decent skill and are strong. And some of those moves have not worked out very well. Nathan Horton acquisition, which was really what was seen as to put them over the edge, to make them be closer to, being a consistent contender, has not worked out at all. And I don't know. I think their hardworking ways last year worked very well, but the injuries dug them such a huge hole. Unless other teams completely fall apart, and that would include teams like fellow division rival, the Islanders and whatnot. Unless those teams completely implode or suffer some catastrophic injury to an important player, I just don't think they have what it takes. And if somehow they did, how much would they have left in the tank to really threaten anybody once they got there? That'd be a case where they're just happy they got there and they're exhausted because they had to press so hard, because everything, you're pretty much having to ask the team to run the table, and that's pretty difficult to do night after night when you have other teams that are fighting for their playoff lives as well. So it's not like everyone's just gonna roll over for them, and they've had a number of different games where I felt they had opportunities and they squandered those chances too against some of the lesser teams in the league. So, and now when you've you've used up your schedule on the lesser teams of the league and you still lost, now you're playing the better half of the teams in the league, and that just makes that road that much tougher to go. So I don't see them in the playoffs this year. I think they'll be a playoff team next year, knock on wood, injuries providing, but this year I think is one where it's unfortunately, squandered due to the injuries they suffered.
Yeah. All right. Well, fair enough. That was all the teams on my list for the Eastern Conference. I don't know if you had anything to touch up on otherwise, but
I guess I have one Eastern Conference team I'd just like to ask a question about because they interest me, and for a couple different reasons, is the Florida Panthers. Obviously a market which is absolutely awful for hockey. It's pretty obvious there's very few people there at the games, and now finally they're at least announcing attendance figures that are much more honest than what they used to be when they used to say that the arena was virtually sold out when it was pretty obvious there was nobody there. Um, so my question to you is, the Florida Panthers have managed a number of wins against pretty decent opponents, and they seem to be a team that can ambush anybody on any given night. Do the Panthers make the playoffs this season?
To be honest, I couldn't even name half their roster just because they don't even seem to be an NHL team. I mean, besides even they're on top of being kind of historically bad, or at least like in the last few years, they don't get any coverage. They don't have a true like number one guy, and it kind of seems to be the team where players now are starting to be kind of cast-offs to the Panthers. I will say that I think Luongo can get them there. I just don't know if he'll be able to maintain that same presence once the playoffs do come around. And I'm thinking of guys like Willie Mitchell on their back end, and just maybe just kind of a patchwork team that might be able to kind of put together that momentum and kind of be one of those teams that has something to prove. But I think in the long run that kind of comes bite you in the butt a little bit. So I could see him fighting for a bottom spot, I suppose, but I don't see them being a true threat necessarily. How about you?
I wouldn't say they're a threat to do a lot of great damage in the postseason, but I do think that they do a pretty good job of catching teams by surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Last night they did a pretty good job on the Detroit Red Wings, and I think there's like you mentioned, I don't know if they're all cast off. I mean, they do have a reasonable group of younger players, which they've now tried to put into more prominent roles. Nick Bjugstad, of course, being probably the most notable one for people in Minnesota,
Yeah.
who really seems to be kind of finding himself at the NHL level now. I mean, he's having a terrific season, but to a lesser extent, I mean, the funny thing to me in some cases about the Florida Panthers, as pesky and I don't know, as pesky as they seem to be as a team, believe it or not, there's actually a lot of underperforming players on the Panthers, which means that they actually could be even better if a few people start to catch fire. Jonathan Huberdeau has been pretty quiet this season again, and if he caught fire along with Bjugstad, I'm not saying that that's going to make any team shake in their boots, but that gives them some offense and some skill that they desperately need. And I don't know. I guess for myself, maybe it's because everyone enjoys picking on the Florida Panthers that I feel like I have to like crusade for them a little bit. I do think that they need to leave that market. I think it's sad for the NHL to be there. And while I really enjoyed that fantastic cup run they had back in 1995 with the Rats,
Mm-hmm.
96. I think it was 96 when the Rat Trick.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that run, but it just is not working in Florida, and they're worthy of a better market, I think. Um, and I think that could really help improve the tone of the kind of the feelings about the team going in. And like you said, it's no one likes to see a backwater market of any kind, just because it kind of brings depression to the game itself. And while we're actually seeing more players coming out of the state of Florida, I mean, it's not like Florida doesn't have any other teams to say that it has. So I think the Panthers are a nice story right now, and I mean, they could use some help if they're gonna take that next step and really push for the playoffs. But I think I think of one thing I feel confident is if they don't make it this year, they will be, just mark my words, they will be a great spoiler team. They will spoil some seasons for a couple clubs out there, because they're the type of team that, yep, we're not supposed to win. We'll win a game when you really needed to win it, and maybe that's the role they're trying to play. And it's a step closer towards actually making that step into the playoffs.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think this would be a fun recording to go back to maybe in a couple months to see where maybe some of our predictions fell into place, and how true we were about it. And I've said it a bunch, but injuries can play a big role either way, and it gets to the point in the season where you're relying on players that you didn't necessarily think you would have to. So I think players will, or teams will then be able to show their true identity in terms of the depth that they have and what those players are willing to put on the line in terms of getting those wins in March and April. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to. I figured maybe in January or so we can come back with another topic, and I think that maybe Twitter or using the blog or even the Wild message board would be an opportunity for that. But I think it'd be fun to discuss something new at the very least, and maybe towards the end of the season we can kind of come back and do a comparison recording from this one.
Yeah, that's and it's out there now. So as soon as we send this off, it'll be there for all eternity for people to laugh at us, or say, these are the smartest two guys in the world.
Right.
So I mean, I look forward to it. And again, thanks for kind of passing on the idea, and I'm glad we can make this happen. And so for anybody that's watching and listening right now, I guess I would say submit if you want to have something you want to talk about, just like Matt did. Just submit either a message to me, Twitter at State of Hockey News, or on the Wild.com message boards, care of Lemaire is God. That's who I am. Race any, I guess, even Matt at DC Hawk at the Wild.com message boards, or your Twitter handle, which is
New Glarus Hawk. So yeah, I just kind of started one. So I'm very, very low on the followers numbers. So I could use some more, and
yeah.
I think if I did have some more, I'd be able to maybe post a little bit more. But it's kind of pointless if you're just talking to yourself. So
That's true. That's true. And the only difference is that you don't call them followers, you call them minions, right?
right.
Well, anyways, it's been great, and like I said, I hope to do this in the future. And again, thanks for listening to our podcast today. And again, thanks to Matt for kind of providing the idea and kind of the genesis of it all. So, that being said, have a great Christmas and holidays. If I don't talk to you sooner.
All right. Thanks, Derek. Same to you.
Yep. This is State of Hockey News signing off.